All right. Today we are going to discuss chapter 3. Oliver goes to London. And I've used a light blue colored ink pen to write down the notes for chapter 3. So let's see. The first thing that I'm going to discuss is the characters that we are introduced to in chapter 3. So you can see that we are introduced to basically one important character, and he's a very important character, Jack Dawkins, who is also known as the Artful Dodger. And in the chapter, he explains to Oliver, when he meets Oliver, why he is called the Artful Dodger. We'll come to that part later. Oliver also meets an old woman and a gatekeeper. He meets farmers, pub owners, and travelers on his way to London. The old woman and An old woman and a gatekeeper are the only ones who offer him food on his journey. The Artful Dodger, Jack Dawkins, he's described as a very strange looking fellow. He had the face of a boy, just an ordinary boy's face, but he behaved like an adult. He was really short for his age, and he had these little, sharp, ugly eyes. And he wore a hat which seemed as if it was just stuck to his head and would blow off at any moment. And he wore a very long coat, a man's coat, which was obviously too big for him. It fell right up to his, um, up to his ankles, and the sleeves of the coat were so long that his hands were almost covered up. So he looked quite a figure. All right. So, what are the important things that happen in chapter 3? Now we see that Oliver officially becomes Mr. Sowerberry's, that is, he was the Undertaker's assistant. He accompanies Mr. Sowerberry to various funerals, to burials, and he observes a lot of human behavior. He sees people who actually would pretend to cry in church and then later be just jolly and merry. And on the other hand, he also saw people um, who just remained calm and quiet and probably happy even after the death of a loved one. They could control their grief and not show it to other people. So Oliver observed all this human behavior and he was really surprised to see all this. Now, Noah Claypole, he was very, very jealous of Oliver because Oliver was um, becoming, a close companion to Mr. Sowerberry. He was going to all these burials, and Noah, who was, as it is, a boy who was treated badly and wanted to treat Oliver badly because he thought Oliver was of a lower level, he just wanted to hurt Oliver. So on one particular day, he wanted to make Oliver cry somehow. So he hit him, he pulled his hair, but then when he saw that it wasn't affecting Oliver, he started saying rubbish about his mum. And he used to call him Workhouse, not Oliver. He never said Oliver. He called him Workhouse. Hey, Workhouse. Uh, so where's your mother? And he started saying ugly things about his mother, that she wasn't a really nice lady, she was a wicked lady, and that it was nice that she died. Oliver could not tolerate this. It really hurt him, and he knocked down Noah. And though Noah was twice his size, he hit Noah, and Noah could basically do nothing but cry out to Charlotte and Mrs. Sowerberry to help him. Well, these two ladies, they came rushing in, screaming and shouting, and they tried to rescue Noah from Oliver. And Noah was shouting at the top of his lungs, oh, he's going to murder me, he's going to murder me. Mrs. Sowerberry and Charlotte, they locked him up in a cellar, and Oliver kept banging the door. And Mrs. Sowerberry and Sowerberry, she tells Noah to go and call Mr. Bumble. Now Noah, he rushes to the church to call Mr. Bumble, and he makes sure that he has a very sad looking face before he meets Mr. Bumble. And then he tells Mr. Bumble, oh, you better come because Oliver has gone mad. He tried to kill me. And Mr. Bumble was really angry. And well, he goes to Mrs. Sowerberry and Charlotte, and he hears Oliver, banging at the door. And Oliver says, "Please let me out, Mr. Bumble. I'm not afraid of you." And Mr. Bumble was pretty angry about that. He was a little frightened as well. Now, Mr. Sowerberry, when he came back to the house, and he heard what had happened, he hit Oliver mercilessly, and more because he knew if he didn't hit Oliver, Mrs. Sowerberry would never forgive him. He knew that Oliver was probably not at fault, but he still hit him. That night, Oliver felt very lonely. He cried and he cried, and he decided to run away. He decided to run away to London. London was 70 miles further, but he still decided to go. And on his way, he came across many people. He just had a piece of bread, if I recollect, two pairs of socks. He had a penny and a rough shirt, and that's all he had when he left. He had to use his penny to buy some more bread on the second day, and it took him 7 days before he could reach a small town in London, just outside London, a small town, the small town of Barnet. Um, and then at Barnet, he meets the Artful Dodger, that is Jack Dawkins. And Jack Dawkins, we learn later that this was no coincidence that he met Oliver. And anyway, he takes Oliver, he buys him some food, and then he says, "Well, Oliver, I'm sure you're looking for a place to sleep," because he asked Oliver where he was going, whether he had money, whether he had work, and whether he had a place to sleep in. And he offers Oliver a place. He says, "There's this very nice gentleman, and he'll let you sleep, and he won't even take any money from you." And Oliver was very, very happy and relieved. Jack Dawkins also tells him about himself. He says, "People call me the Artful Dodger. Artful because I'm very good at pretending, and Dodger because if I do something wrong, I always get away." So Oliver, he kind of thinks, "Hey, is this someone I really want to be friends with?" But anyway, Oliver was too tired and too hungry, and he really wanted to see this old gentleman who was offering him a place to sleep in without taking any money. And he decided that he would first see the place and then probably decide whether he would still be friends with Jack Dawkins. So that's all that happens in chapter 3. I also added another point to the conflict. In the beginning of the chapter, Oliver talks about all these people who, who who lost their loved ones and the way they behaved during funerals. And I think there was a little bit of hypocrisy, because there are some people who just pretended to cry to feel sad about people who were dead, but later on they seem to recover very quickly. So they're just being hypocrites, just trying to cry and feel sad and look sad so that other people would think that they were really sad that they had lost someone, but they were actually not so sad. So there is a bit of hypocrisy also in Oliver Twist. I've also added a little bit to the setting. So you see that Oliver reaches the little town of Barnet, which is just outside London. So this is also one of the settings in Oliver Twist. So our story map is filling up gradually. Tomorrow we'll be doing chapter 4. Till then, take care.